Good day, everybody. Today I'd like to discuss how to get things done despite challenges and how some of our deadlines are reliant on other people or processes that do not have the same agency that we have. Let me share some tips on managing a timeline and meeting deadlines because it can be managed. In order to get things done, especially when you're reliant on other people to meet deadlines, you have to manage your time. You have to have good working relationships and there has to be proper communication. Managing time is a process of planning and exercising conscious control of time spent on specific activities, especially to increase effectiveness, efficiency, and productivity. To manage time, one needs to plan and put measures in place to manage the time for a task or a deadline. You can use a planning tool such as a calendar and plan your week ahead to allow you to monitor how your time is spent. Planning is very important because you need to determine what must be achieved, by when it must be achieved, who is involved. You need to identify possible risks as well as the impact of your deadline not being met. Decision making and prioritization is you need to make sure that you are in control of your time and prioritize what tasks you tackle. You can break down your task into achievable goals, and it's important to start as early as possible and do not leave stuff that can be done immediately, as anything can change that can affect your deadline, for example, load shedding. Managing expectations is important because you need to set boundaries to tasks that are not your priority, and that is, for instance, where a colleague asks you to help them with something. Ensure when you do help them that it doesn't affect the deadline that you have to do. Delegating and outsourcing tasks, identify the right people for a task and clearly communicate your criteria. It is also important to remember that when depending on others, they have their own deliverables and timelines. It is therefore important to indicate the importance of your requests in instances where you have to delegate a task to make sure the request is clear. When delegating a task to somebody else, you can also add a deadline to your request to make sure that when you receive your feedback, you can give them an estimated time of when you want feedback, so that if there is any problems or issues that needs to be resolved, that you can do that way before your deadline is due and your deadline has to be met. By having a process or a tool to follow and following it diligently will result in it becoming a habit, and it will eliminate stress or anxiety for future tasks. For example, the Eisenhower Matrix is a planning tool to help prioritize tasks. The Eisenhower Matrix will assist you in prioritizing tasks into what is important and what's not important, what is urgent and what is not urgent. It will also help you with what must be done and what can wait, what is important but not urgent, and what can be delegated. Also avoid time wasters such as lengthy chats with colleagues in passages or lengthy tea breaks or smoke breaks. You calling meetings for status updates when it can be done with an email or a call, or in some instances not saying no and taking up tasks for other people that can influence your deadline. As previously indicated, some deadlines are dependent on other people. When dealing with others, it's important to respect their roles, especially if you need their assistance. They also have other tasks and responsibilities. When requesting assistance, maintain constant communication to get status updates. When you need to send them documents, ensure it's correct, as incorrect documentation can take up unnecessary time. Good working relationships will allow you to be able to call the person and in some instances maybe WhatsApp them instead of email or meetings. People can respond quicker, especially when they are unable to take your call. It is also very important when dealing with others to inform them of the urgency so that they are aware that you are keeping to a deadline, and they will speed up their processes if possible. Important tips to remember is what questions to ask. Questions you can ask is, what is the task? What is the deadline? Is it achievable? Because if you rely on other people, the deadlines are not always achievable to what it was said to you. If you know your work and you know who you are dealing with and who the role players will be, and you know that the deadline is not achievable, you will need to negotiate a new deadline. That is obviously if the deadline is not achievable. You need to determine what the impact of the deadline is if it's not met. Who will be the role players? You will need to know what resources will be needed. You will also know what the risks can be anticipated, because you can prepare for them. Risks can be avoided, it can be reduced, it can be shared or transferred. And there will be instances, especially with deadlines, that you will have to work around the clock. You will be running against time as time flies. But if you manage time, you do proper planning, you will be able to achieve your deadline. It is important to remember that deadlines can be met with proper planning and communication, as well as eliminating risk. As long as you set goals and plans, get your ducks in a row, if you prioritize, that deadlines can be managed. In conclusion, I would like to end off with a video and what we can learn from the oak tree. If you think of the workplace, is that every day there's a hurricane, but sometimes in the week, some hurricanes are bigger than others. But as all the trees grow their roots and they interlink with each other, it represents a team. If the team is healthy, as the trees are healthy, their roots are intertwined, we are all there to support one another, and we as office officials also form part of that link. It is important for organizations to grow that relationship in order to weather any storm and to do what needs to be done, especially in an environment where we rely on other people. We also must spiral our trunks to be flexible in the winds and allow our leaves to curl, to allow the wind to flow through without causing damage. Thank you.
During Hurricane Katrina, you would have thought that the live oaks on St. Charles Street would have died, when actually only 4 out of over 700 trees died. Why is that? Well, the trees, it turns out, the whole thing is a blueprint for how to survive hurricanes. Their trunk is spiraled, so they flex in the wind, and their branches are spiraled, so they flex, and their leaves, when the wind hits them, they curl into the shape of a Fibonacci sequence, which allows the wind to flow through with minimum friction so that the leaves don't get torn off easily. And even more importantly, under the ground, its roots are actually entwined with the roots of the trees next to it. So when a hurricane hits a live oak in New Orleans, it's not hitting one tree, it's hitting a whole community. So perhaps in rebuilding New Orleans to be more hurricane resilient, instead of our individual pier foundations, we may think about foundations that have horizontal components that twine together with the foundations of the buildings next door, so that you've got the wind hitting an entire community of buildings and not just one. Architects and engineers are beginning to explore this in other places. They're starting to think like a live oak tree to design buildings and homes. They're safer.
I'm attaching a few references and websites to visit to give you some guidance and clarity in assisting you in meeting your deadlines.